Welcome, travelers, to Adventures in Security. In this video, we examine the importance, challenges, and management of an organization's compliance programs. The script study guide with references is available in the video description. If you like what you see, if you learn anything, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any content. Compliance is a crucial pillar of cybersecurity and risk management, serving as the structured expression of an organization's commitment to safeguarding sensitive information while aligning operations with legal, regulatory, and ethical standards. However, adhering to compliance standards involves more than just implementing policies and technologies. It must be deeply ingrained in the organizational culture. Culture, which encompasses the shared values, beliefs, and behaviors within an organization, determines how employees interpret rules, respond to risks, and prioritize ethical behavior. It fosters a proactive attitude towards cybersecurity, reduces the incidence of risky behavior, and reinforces organizational resilience. In contrast, a weak compliance culture can lead to widespread negligence, willful violations, and increased exposure to cyber threats. This video explores the central role of organizational culture in promoting compliance, examines theories that explain non-compliant behavior, and evaluates strategies and frameworks for mitigating such behaviors to improve cybersecurity and risk management effectiveness. By drawing on recent academic research, NIST guidance, and behavioral theories, it aims to demonstrate how a strong compliance culture not only supports regulatory adherence but also fosters ethical integrity and operational security across all organizational levels. Organizational culture significantly influences how compliance is perceived and enacted. According to NIST SP 800-53 Revision 5, organizations are encouraged to establish a culture of security and compliance that integrates controls into everyday operations. Culture dictates the formal mechanisms of power and the informal norms that shape individual behavior. When employees understand that compliance is a shared organizational value, they are more likely to engage in compliant behaviors even without direct supervision. Schein's model of organizational culture posits that cultural elements operate at three levels: artifacts, espoused values, and basic underlying assumptions. Artifacts are visible elements of culture such as dress codes, office layout, organizational policies, technologies in use, and written codes of conduct. They are tangible representations of culture that an outsider can observe but may not fully understand without context. Espoused values refer to the organization's stated norms, strategies, philosophies, and goals, what the leadership claims to value. These include mission statements, ethical declarations, and formal compliance policies that communicate what the organization believes it stands for. However, espoused values may or may not reflect the actual behavior of organizational members. The deepest level, basic underlying assumptions, consists of the unconscious, taken for granted beliefs and perceptions that truly guide behavior. These assumptions are often invisible, yet they form the core of an organization's culture and are the most powerful influence on how compliance is interpreted and practiced. For example, an organization might espouse the value of transparency, but if the underlying assumption is that whistleblowers are punished, employees will avoid reporting compliance violations. When compliance is embedded at all three levels, from visible security policies to deep-seated assumptions about ethical behavior, the likelihood of regulatory adherence and cybersecurity discipline increases. Studies have demonstrated that organizations with strong ethical climates report fewer cybersecurity breaches and demonstrate greater regulatory compliance. For example, Da Vega and Van Nijkerk research underscores the connection between organizational culture and information security behavior, noting that positive cultural perceptions correlate strongly with adherence to security policies. In this context, culture acts as both a preventive and enabling force, setting expectations that guide individual and collective behavior in the face of security threats. Achieving a culture of compliance can meet various challenges, with the following barriers covering most of them. Tick box culture. Decoupling of policies and practices. Compliance fatigue. Cultural barriers. Resistance to change. Lack of leadership commitment. perceived ineffectiveness of compliance programs, inadequate training and awareness, hierarchical communication structures, and overemphasis on punitive measures. Tick box culture represents a superficial approach to compliance, where organizations focus more on formally completing tasks than on embedding ethical behavior and shared values into daily operations. This often stems from regulatory pressure that prioritizes documentation over impact. Employees in these environments may perceive compliance as a bureaucratic exercise rather than a meaningful standard of conduct. When compliance becomes synonymous with form filling, the intrinsic motivation to adhere to ethical and procedural norms erodes. This undermines deeper cultural change, leading to symbolic rather than substantive adoption of compliance measures. Decoupling of policies and practices occurs when the official policies designed to encourage compliance are not translated into actual employee behaviors or managerial practices. This often happens when leadership promotes a policy publicly for image or audit purposes, but does not enforce it consistently. Employees quickly notice the gap between words and actions, which fosters cynicism and reduces trust in the system. As a result, compliance efforts may appear as performative rather than transformative, preventing integration into organizational culture. Compliance fatigue is when employees are overwhelmed by continuous policies, updates, audits, and reporting requirements. Over time, this overload leads to mental exhaustion and disengagement. Fatigued employees may deprioritize compliance because they view it as excessive, repetitive, or disconnected from their core responsibilities. Rather than fostering a sense of shared responsibility, constant compliance demands can create apathy, resulting in corners being cut or policies being ignored, thereby undermining culture-building efforts. Cultural barriers within multinational or cross-functional organizations prevent a unified approach to compliance. Differences in local customs, languages, and values can lead to inconsistent interpretation and implementation of compliance standards. For instance, what constitutes ethical behavior in one region may be interpreted differently elsewhere. These differences create a misalignment in compliance behaviors, especially when central policies do not adapt to local contexts. In such cases, organizations fail to establish a shared ethical foundation, essential for a cohesive compliance culture. Resistance to change is a well-documented organizational phenomenon. Employees and managers often cling to familiar routines and structures, especially in long-standing organizations. Compliance initiatives, particularly those requiring behavioral or cultural shifts, can be perceived as threats to autonomy or efficiency. When leaders fail to manage change effectively, resistance manifests in passive noncompliance or open defiance. This inertia can neutralize compliance programs before gaining traction, reinforcing the status quo. Lack of leadership commitment critically undermines attempts to foster a compliance culture. Culture in organizations is shaped mainly by leadership behavior. If executives and managers do not consistently model ethical behavior and adherence to compliance standards, employees interpret this as a signal that compliance is not truly valued. In such an environment, even well-designed programs will fail because employees take their cues from leadership behavior rather than formal policies. Moreover, when leadership prioritizes short-term results over ethical conduct, it implicitly condones noncompliance. Perceived ineffectiveness of compliance programs occurs when employees view policies as disconnected from real-world challenges. Employees may become skeptical of their utility if compliance protocols are seen as irrelevant or ineffective in addressing organizational risks. This perception often emerges in organizations where compliance departments operate in silos and fail to engage with frontline operations. As a result, employees may comply superficially or selectively, believing that the policies do not contribute meaningfully to organizational performance or safety. Inadequate training and awareness limit employees' ability to effectively understand or apply compliance requirements. Training programs that are too generic, infrequent, or overly technical fail to engage employees or build competence. When individuals do not fully grasp why compliance matters or how to operationalize it, they are more likely to overlook critical procedures. Furthermore, organizations that fail to provide ongoing education and scenario-based learning may inadvertently create blind spots in their compliance posture. Hierarchical communication structures can hinder open dialogue and suppress early warning signs of noncompliance. In organizations with rigid authority structures, employees may feel intimidated or unsure about voicing their concerns. This results in a culture of silence, where minor issues can escalate into significant compliance breaches. Furthermore, when upward communication is weak, leadership remains unaware of compliance risks until it is too late. A lack of psychological safety in communication environments directly undermines trust and shared accountability. Overemphasizing punitive measures to enforce compliance can be counterproductive. While accountability is essential, a culture driven by fear of punishment discourages transparency, innovation, and learning. Employees may conceal mistakes or avoid reporting violations out of fear of retribution. In such environments, compliance is perceived as a survival tactic rather than a shared value. Sustainable compliance cultures require a balance of deterrence and encouragement, where education, recognition, and corrective feedback play equal roles in shaping behavior. Even with a strong culture of compliance, some employees will still attempt to act in ways that are either illegal or unethical. Non-compliant behavior in organizations is a multifaceted phenomenon that stems from psychological, sociological, and organizational dynamics. Understanding these drivers requires an exploration of various theories supported by empirical and policy-based research. The following 9 theories, grounded in recent academic and government literature, help explain why individuals may engage in behaviors that violate formal rules or expected conduct in the workplace. Psychological contract theory, planned behavior theory, social learning theory, neutralization theory, strain theory, organizational justice theory, cognitive load theory, moral disengagement theory, and systems theory. The psychological contract theory posits that when employees believe their implicit expectations have been violated by their employer, such as promises regarding workload, recognition, or job stability, they may respond with withdrawal behaviors, including non-compliance. This breach leads to a decline in trust and emotional investment, prompting employees to question the legitimacy of organizational rules. In this context, non-compliance becomes a reaction to perceived injustice rather than a conscious act of defiance. The theory of planned behavior asserts that an individual's actions are influenced by their intentions, which are shaped by attitudes toward the behavior, perceived norms, and perceived behavioral control. When employees perceive compliance as inconvenient, misaligned with peer behavior, or beyond their control due to resource constraints, they are more likely to deviate from expectations. In such instances, non-compliance is a rational decision, influenced by beliefs and social pressures rather than ignorance or malice. Social learning theory explains non-compliance as a behavior learned through observing others, especially when those individuals are rewarded or not penalized for their actions. In environments where peers or supervisors routinely bypass policies without consequence, employees may come to see non-compliance as acceptable or even advantageous. This diffusion of deviant norms illustrates how culture can override formal structures of accountability. Neutralization theory provides insight into how individuals rationalize deviant behavior to avoid feelings of guilt. Employees may justify non-compliance by denying harm, blaming management, or claiming necessity. These rationalizations diminish internal moral conflict, allowing individuals to engage in unethical acts while preserving a self-image of integrity. Such cognitive dissonance strategies are particularly prevalent when policies are viewed as arbitrary or excessively punitive. Strain theory, initially developed in criminology, suggests that individuals experience pressure when they cannot achieve organizational goals through legitimate means. In corporate contexts, this might occur when employees face unrealistic performance metrics or conflicting demands, pushing them to bypass rules to meet expectations. Under strain, noncompliance emerges as a coping mechanism to resolve the disconnect between expectations and means. Organizational justice theory highlights the significance of fairness in decision-making processes, outcomes, and interpersonal treatment. When employees perceive inequities in policy enforcement, such as favoritism or inconsistent discipline, they may withdraw their commitment or retaliate with non-compliant actions, undermining respect for rules and damaging the psychological contract between employees and employers. Cognitive load theory suggests that individuals have a limited mental capacity for processing information. In situations where compliance procedures are overly complex, or employees are inundated with information and tasks, the likelihood of errors or omissions increases. In such cases, noncompliance may be unintentional, stemming from the inability to manage competing demands or remember detailed procedural steps. Thus, reducing cognitive load is essential for facilitating compliance. The deterrence theory of compliance posits that individuals are rational actors who evaluate the costs and benefits of their actions. If the perceived likelihood of being caught or punished is low, and the reward for noncompliance is high, employees may opt to violate rules. Weak enforcement mechanisms or inconsistent oversight diminish deterrence, leading to a higher incidence of noncompliance. Conversely, visible and consistent consequences can strengthen adherence. Moral disengagement theory examines how individuals separate their moral standards from their actions, allowing them to behave against ethical norms without experiencing distress, often facilitating euphemistic labeling, for example, creative reporting, diffusion of responsibility, or dehumanizing those impacted by the violation. In corporate settings, moral disengagement enables employees to normalize deviance and engage in systemic noncompliance. Lastly, systems theory sees organizations as complex systems consisting of interdependent components. Noncompliance can stem not from individual misconduct, but from systemic failures such as poor policy design, inadequate training, or technological inefficiencies. This holistic perspective highlights that noncompliance is often a symptom of structural dysfunction rather than a personal failing. Addressing these root causes necessitates cross-functional collaboration and systemic reform. These theories reflect the various causes of noncompliance, which range from individual cognition and group behavior to systemic organizational shortcomings. Therefore, addressing noncompliance requires multifaceted solutions that go beyond punitive enforcement, encompassing training, cultural change, leadership modeling, and systemic improvement. To cultivate a robust culture of compliance and effectively address non-compliant behavior, organizations must implement integrated solutions that tackle multiple cultural and behavioral challenges simultaneously. Instead of merely applying isolated remedies to each issue, organizations should adopt multifaceted strategies grounded in proven organizational theory, behavioral science, and cybersecurity governance frameworks. Such proactive solutions will not only address specific compliance failures, but also actively promote ethical behavior and strengthen systemic resilience, ensuring long-term success and reliability. Therefore, organizations must acknowledge the importance of comprehensive approaches in cultivating a culture where compliance thrives and ethical standards prevail. A central and highly effective strategy is creating and enforcing psychologically safe feedback loops that allow employees to voice concerns and receive guidance without fear of punishment or reprisal. This mechanism mitigates the overemphasis on punitive measures by shifting the focus from fear-based deterrence to trust-based engagement. It also counters hierarchical communication structures by promoting two-way dialogue and transparency between employees and leadership. Research by Haney and Lutters emphasizes the transformative power of transparent communication frameworks, where compliance evolves from a top-down directive to a shared organizational value. Embedding compliance into operational workflows through adaptive technology platforms effectively addresses compliance fatigue, the decoupling of policy and practice, and cognitive overload. Automation tools that customize compliance prompts according to user behavior and specific responsibilities can lessen the mental burden on employees, aligning with recommendations from NIST IR 8420A, which emphasizes the importance of role-relevant and streamlined awareness efforts to prevent information saturation and behavioral disengagement. When implemented correctly, such systems ensure that compliance activities remain relevant, timely, and integrated within the flow of daily work, thereby reducing the risk of noncompliance due to task overload or forgetfulness. Another powerful multidimensional intervention involves leadership modeling and ethical reinforcement at all organizational levels. When leaders consistently demonstrate integrity, transparency, and adherence to compliance policies, they counteract resistance to change, eliminate the perception of performative compliance, and rebuild trust damaged by psychological contract breaches. As emphasized in NIST SP 853 revision. 5. Security and compliance controls should be exemplified by leadership to become normative expectations rather than discretionary behaviors, supporting moral engagement by demonstrating the alignment between organizational values and executive behavior, reducing the likelihood of moral disengagement and neutralization strategies among employees. Designing compliance programs through participatory governance, where employees co-create policies and training frameworks, simultaneously addresses concerns about the perceived ineffectiveness of compliance initiatives, cultural misalignment, and organizational justice. When employees from diverse roles and backgrounds engage in the policy development process, they are more likely to view the resulting standards as fair, contextually appropriate, and meaningful. This engagement helps to mitigate resistance stemming from perceptions of irrelevance or top-down imposition. Organizational justice theory emphasizes that fair processes enhance the legitimacy of policies, which in turn improves both compliance rates and perceptions of the ethical climate. Adopting a zero-trust security model based on behavioral analytics enables organizations to tackle non-compliance from various angles, including strain-related behavior, planned deviance, and learned norm violations. Zero-trust redefines security and compliance not as static permissions, but as continuously monitored, behavior-informed access models. According to NIST SP 800207, Zero Trust enhances compliance by consistently validating user actions based on context, thereby limiting opportunities for policy circumvention and ensuring that only those with a legitimate need can access sensitive resources. By utilizing behavioral baselines and deviation alerts, organizations can identify and respond to both intentional and unintentional noncompliance in real time. Furthermore, scenario-based compliance education grounded in actual organizational incidents can tackle tick-box behavior, neutralization tactics, and non-compliance stemming from limited contextual awareness. Rather than relying on abstract training sessions, organizations can implement narrative-driven simulations that immerse employees in decision-making roles. These exercises present employees with ethical dilemmas and compliance conflicts in safe learning environments, thereby encouraging moral reflection and experiential understanding. De Vega and van Niekerk support the effectiveness of such immersive learning methods, observing that the primary factor influencing secure and compliant behavior is the internalization of values through meaningful engagement, rather than rote compliance training. In tandem, the organization must also implement nudging mechanisms that subtly reinforce positive compliance behavior while minimizing cognitive strain. These mechanisms include interface design changes, such as compliance prompts during system login or transaction approvals, which serve as low-friction reminders of policy obligations. The nudge approach, advocated by Thaler and Sunstein, offers an evidence-based method for influencing behavior without coercion, thereby improving compliance while promoting employee autonomy and cognitive efficiency. By employing these comprehensive and integrated strategies, organizations can tackle a wide range of compliance challenges and behavioral drivers in a synergistic manner. Each solution strengthens ethical culture, operational efficiency, and systemic alignment while fostering long-term behavioral transformation. Rather than viewing compliance failures as isolated incidents or employee shortcomings, this holistic model considers non-compliance as the result of dynamic, interconnected organizational conditions that must be addressed through coordinated leadership, thoughtful design, and ongoing cultural investment. That's it for this video. If you have questions or comments, post those in the video discussion. And until next time, be careful what you click.